Good morning. I first have a question. I'm going to introduce everyone, but the first question is, how many of you feel that sustainability is important to your business? Okay, right on, okay. Follow-up question. How many of you feel confident that you know what that means to your business and how to go about putting sustainability strategically into your business? Okay, great. We're in a really good situation then, because we are really fortunate to have some of the Bay Area, which is to say the nation's experts in sustainability here. They come from a wide variety of different aspects of sustainability. I'm grateful that they're here. Right immediately to my right is Eve Blossom, who I've come to sort of think of as the sister I never had, because we go way back. Eve is an architect by training and grew up in architecture and design, and then turned over into sustainability, especially on the social and cultural side, and is the founder of 2 different companies in textile space. But Eve's an expert at building new business models to solve social challenges. And so her 2 companies, Lulan and Weave, Lulan started and functions in Southeast Asia mostly, and a little bit of India. And then Weave was an opportunity in the digital space to take that model that she had proven out and scale it across the world. Next to her is Dawn Danby, who's the senior program manager for sustainable design at Autodesk, which is one of the nation's most committed companies to sustainability. It's core to their strategy and has been for over a decade, probably. Dawn is an industrial designer by training, and her sustainability roots go all the way back to design school and before design school. And then she went and got a sustainable MBA at BGI, at Bainbridge, which is now called Pinchot. And right about that time, actually, I was getting my sustainable, I think I was a year behind you here at Presidio, so we have a similar background there. And then to her right is Beau Seil. Did I get that right? Got it, okay, all right. Beau Seil, whose expertise is in sustainable investing and investing in companies. He's the founder of, or managing founder of Unitus Impact, which is an investment firm, basically, a VC firm that's focused on investing in companies whose mission it is to scale impact for people in terms of their livable wage. So he's firmly both in the investment space as well as the social aspects, the social areas of sustainability. So we've got a really good spread here between the ecological tools, financial, social, and cultural aspects of sustainability, because of course that's what sustainability means. And so I wanted to start with a definition, since a lot of us are maybe not as experienced in sustainability. What's your definition of sustainability when people ask you, what the hell is sustainability? Anyone?
Hi there, this is Dawn. Oh goodness. It's a very broad term. It gets used to mean a lot of things. But I always go back to fundamentals. I mean, we are trying to exist on this planet and maintain ourselves as humans and balance all of the environmental and human and social health on the planet. And one of the means of doing that is also our financial and economic mechanisms that we use. So we try to look at the balancing of the human and the environmental and the financial, because they are really all interwoven. I tend to focus, and I will geek out with you in depth on the environmental impact component of that, but it's always something that we have to think about in the context of human and financial systems.
Go.
Yeah, I'll jump in. For our work, we have a bunch of investors who fundamentally believe in building sustainable economic systems throughout the world. And the challenges, I think, as we've seen over the last 5 years of when you look at low-income populations and you see fast-growing populations in developing nations where people see that there is a better life out there, but they can't reach it, what types of problems does that create for us? So we have investors in our fund, groups like OPIC, which is a developmental finance institution of the US government, the Rockefeller Foundation, and then a bunch of other family offices, pension funds, and others who say, if we're not actually helping to generate economic opportunities for low-income people, we're going to build a completely unsustainable world, which is we're going to pay for our problems in one way or the other. And they say let's invest in companies that are trying to do that exact thing. So as I look at sustainability from our work, every single investment that we make is focused on how do we better the lives of low-income people in Southeast Asia, India, Sri Lanka, China, so that we don't face those problems, or at least, we're starting to try and deal with those problems.
When you say sustainable economic models, it kind of presumes that the traditional economic models are unsustainable. Is that something that you believe or experience?
Well, I think there's massive power in the current economic models. It's how do we continue to tweak and design that? It's not as if there was some grand master plan where somebody laid down what capitalism means, and we're all following the perfect model of capitalism. We all know that it's not a purely capitalistic model based on things that have happened. So let's try and make the best one that fits the needs of this planet and society at the current time.
Eve, you've dealt with this for a decade now.
Yeah, so there's all these consequences for how we've been doing our businesses. And so if you look at it, we can talk about slave labor and throughout our systems. There's all these imbalances that are happening throughout the systems that we need to really come and fix again, and really think about all the processes. Every single inflection point along the path is a person, it's a country, it's a community. And these are the things that got left behind, I would say, in our economic models.
So what can we do about this? Like, how are each of you in your profession as well as your personal life trying to change this, how to fix this? Anyone?
So I work in design, and I went and studied industrial design some years ago now because I really disliked, and I continue to dislike, the way we make and manufacture things. In the sense that almost everything that the majority of what we create as consumer products are effectively disposable. Almost everything we create is disposable. Even much of our housing and our building stock is disposable. And that's not what designers want, and that's not actually what people want. Nobody really wants that. There are economic reasons why those decisions are made. But I think there's also better ways to design. And so that's been my motivating factor. And it means going down in looking at things like, how do we actually design buildings in completely different ways, or electronics in completely different ways? And some of those ways are very common sense. So right now I work with Autodesk, and I don't know, do you guys know what Autodesk is? Or are you familiar with them as a tech company? Most people.
Great.
So for the handful of people who don't, we make digital design software for engineers and architects, engineers of all different kinds, product designers, etc. But many of those people, the majority of them, are making decisions that have resource implications, right? They're some decisions that they're making by clicking inside a CAD program is going to have a knock-on effect, because it's going to mean that steel is going to be specified to build a building. Some kind of plastic is going to be chosen. Something's going to be manufactured. And all of those things come from somewhere, and they all are going to go somewhere. And so if we're able to help those people make decisions, for example, if you can help somebody start to actually run tests and models of a building inside a piece of software, and do as many different tests of it as they can, prototyping without actually generating any material effect, you can help them design for a net zero building, a building that actually doesn't need any external input and doesn't need to burn any additional emissions. Those are the kinds of things that I'm focused on, is working with in the case of our product developers, the people who write the software, to be able to elevate those kinds of concepts, bring those to our customers, and then really I've done a lot of work on education, helping teach our customers how to adopt those new ways of doing design. Because one of the challenges that we're facing is that if we want to move towards more sustainable, in my case, looking at design and the way we deal with material reality, we actually have to change how people who may have been trained to be architects or hardware developers or whatever, they have to actually think about their work differently. They have to adopt new practices. They have to think about, if I'm making electronics, how do I do this so it can be repaired so that it doesn't, it doesn't get wasted effectively every 2 years or less. Those kinds of considerations mean changes in design practice. So it's not just the tools and the tool set, but it's also the mindset of designers that need to change. And so we look at both of those things,
Right.
kind of the supply and demand side.
Well, this is really important because if we have to wait for everyone in the world to become an expert in sustainability, we're not going to really accomplish much
never gonna
because you
happen.
can't be, right?
Yeah.
So what can we do to make it essentially automatic for people to be able to do business and conduct their personal lives more sustainably without having to become an expert in all the issues?
Well, I was just going to ask how many people here actually know about B corporations.
Great.
Okay. So the reason I wanted to bring that up is that I think if our companies become where, it's not at odds to be making a lot of money and doing right by the planet or people, that you can integrate both. And that's really important, and I wanted just to bring that up because I think that's really what our companies can do. And that's kind of the companies that we've been building. And I think it's interesting when you're in design and you start to really use these kinds of ways of thinking about design. My background being an architect, I was working in Vietnam when I saw a 6-year-old being sold to a European man for sex. And I didn't know that existed. And in doing that, I found out, okay, so there are people at risk in these countries of falling into human trafficking. And I started researching human trafficking just to see what this system was. It is a system. It is an underground system, but it is a system. And to see why that is even in place. Why does that function so well? And it functions really well because of the way that our other legitimate, supposedly, companies are set up, where we're really not thinking about fair wage and people who are actually manufacturing. So it's not just the materials, it's also the people involved in the whole process. And bringing that up, I just, when I did my research, the thing I found was the economic options in developing countries is really the key to really making a difference. That if you could find what they are already able to do there with their local materials and highlight that of which they are. So I work with artisans around the world. There are artisans everywhere, right? In the maker communities all over the world. It's in Europe, it's in the US. But when you look at all these type of artisans, then you get to highlight who they are culturally. And I just wanted to bring that up, that the cultural sustainability is really key for all of us too. That if we're all going to be having these homogenous products that we're wearing and that we're carrying, we're losing out on a lot.
To add one more thing to what Eve was saying, I think it's very short-sighted for us sitting here to think that we're going to actually build technology products that, if we're talking about cultural sustainability, that will actually win in those markets. I mean, the investments that we're doing in Indonesia, the Philippines, India, who actually wins those games, oftentimes, except for some major players, let's say Facebook and Amazon, you can't operate from here, build a technology tool and think it's just going to be adopted in those countries. The network effects aren't strong enough. So as I look at the businesses that we're investing into, it's oftentimes people who fundamentally understand the cultural context, they understand the social dynamics, they understand what people's real tastes, needs, and wants are. For example, we invested into a company that works with over 30,000 small shopkeepers in Indonesia. It's building out one of the largest distribution platforms there, and they built a very simple technology tool to do this. But there's some very different dynamics of how low-income women in Indonesia do perform and engage in financial services because they're a part of the informal sector. So we often like to say, let's use technology to somewhat formalize the informal of some of these systems that are there. And we can build incredible companies, not only from an impact perspective, but also from a financial perspective. I mean, these businesses that we're investing into, and typically we're the first investors because we're looking at an income demographic that typically is not recognized as a viable consumer segment by traditional venture and private equity funds. We go in with those investments early on, and then in the next round, they're raising 10 to 30 to $40 million from your traditional VCs that have offices sitting in Singapore, but have no idea what it's like to go an hour and a half outside of Jakarta, let alone the people in Jakarta oftentimes don't know what it's like to be an hour and a half outside of Jakarta to make investments in companies that are dealing with the mass market and not just the top 5% of the population, but the remaining 95%.
I think you could also riff on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that that I've thought about, and we've thought about at different times, is that we want to see more of certain kinds of things to scale. Right? We want to see more renewable energy. We want to see more greener products and greener buildings and things that are made with the health of the communities and the welfare of the communities in mind. And sometimes there's a technology piece of that, right? Like somebody has to figure out how to make solar cells at a certain price point. But the scaling of solar in California is both the price point, but it's also the financial and financing models that where we've seen innovation. And so, part of what I'm hearing you guys talk about too is that, there are some core kind of design concepts or technologies that we want to get out there, but the linchpin is going to be figuring out how to finance them. I mean, that's what I think about all the time. Is like, at what point does it make sense for an architecture firm or for a developer to realize that, in fact, if you own a building and you design it to not be net zero, then you're just leaving money on the table, in fact, and you're just lighting it on fire, basically, because of the operational costs over time. It's so much cheaper to figure out how to design it to not have to pour money in electricity bills into it. Those kinds of figuring out how to finance those things actually sometimes is the critical distinction.
And that not only applies to the upper ends of the market.
Yeah.
If you're talking about people with massive constraints on cash flow, I can only think of maybe 2 or 3 companies in our entire portfolio of 14 where we find ourselves in a position where financing for our customers becomes a challenge, right? So this goes not only from large building projects, but everybody needs to figure out innovative ways of doing financing in order to really jump into a sustainability game.
And this brings me to the point of it's an exciting time right now. I mean, think about it. The reach of technology, because I know we're talking about technology now, but the reach of technology has already gone all the way through the formal, economy. And so now people are looking at the informal. And so people are actually putting a lot of money and time in that because that's the way they're going to make more money and have more expansion. And I think that's very exciting to be at that place right now.
Well, so you've already started to touch on this, but why should companies out there care about this, spectrum of sustainability? What does it do for them, whether it's increasing the efficiency of the money that they're spending or mitigating other kinds of risks or engaging customers? What is it that, these folks out here, why should they start engaging with sustainability across the spectrum?
Well, I could talk a little bit about it from our markets. In Southeast Asia, you're looking at Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines as massive growth markets. So a lot of Japanese companies, Chinese companies, and Korean companies are looking at those countries as essentially the next growth markets for them. And for example, we made an investment into a company that's providing factory workers at Nike factories and other factories with access to low-cost financing. When you've got over 90% of the entire population of Vietnam that is unbanked and has access to no formal sources of credit, if somebody like our co-investor Experian says, we want to be at the forefront of understanding what the credit analytics are on these populations, because at some point they're going to move into a middle-income sector, you better believe that if you're not out in front of that from a strategic standpoint, you will get left in the dust because there are other companies who are looking at these mass markets and saying this is going to happen, just like it happened in the US, just like it happened in any developed country, and so we're going to be ahead of the curve.
Well, and I think it's important to notice that, we think of ourselves as a first world country, but there are communities within our world, within this state, that are just a couple hundred miles away that are just as developing as the developed world that we talk about. So those opportunities exist, for instance, in the Central Valley with migrant farm workers, because they don't have great banking options. So these opportunities are all around us, regardless of where we are. If you have questions, now's the time to start either tapping them out or raising your hands. But I'm going to go to the panel one last time before we go to the audience, and that is there a moment that you can share with us when sustainability catalyzed for you, when you recognize that, oh my God, this is where I want to take my career?
I think I mentioned it was when I was living in Vietnam, and being a designer what did I know about human trafficking? And, when this happened and right in front of me, it was the thing that resonated throughout my body when I said, okay, there's something really off here, like if this is a day-to-day occurrence in every city in the whole world, this is really off. And where's this coming from? And so when I started researching and looking that it was an economic issue, of course, it was surprising to me that there weren't more companies at the time trying to deal with this issue. And looking at it, I was like, oh, this is sustainability. Economic sustainability, cultural sustainability, social sustainability. This is the thing that's going to have to be everywhere. So I think that's really important. And I want to bring up one little point that just really I'm still grappling with. Maybe you guys can help me with this, seriously. People are talking about how AI is going to displace 65% of our jobs, future of work. We've all heard this, right? But I'm sitting on one side saying, well, actually, that will help in the situation with slave labor. Actually will help with slave labor. It'll get rid of majority of slave labor, not all of it, but it will actually help. So I'm like, well, this isn't a bad thing. This could be a good thing. So, anyway.
Anyone else?
I think I started getting involved. I'm from Canada, which is beautiful and lush and green, and also entirely focused on extraction. And so I've seen a lot of things. Forests come down and stuff like that. So that was very motivating to me when I went to design school a long time ago. That was kind of that shift, perhaps, I was motivated to study industrial design to focus on how do we design and manufacture things differently. But I think it was also, even after I became an industrial designer, I became really interested in where are the leverage points? Just being a designer and advocating for certain things has a limited amount of power. And so, in getting involved in studying business and working with technology companies and kind of figuring out, I'm very interested in scale, because I think we're in a hurry. I think there's a lot of shift that needs to happen. And so I think probably one of the other kind of moments was sort of the realization that in fact design was what I wanted to see as an outcome, but it wouldn't necessarily be the mechanism. That the mechanism might actually be, for me, working with businesses and working with technologists to figure out how we can take certain ideas and scale them.
Okay. I'd say for me it was a family focused on social justice for years and years, and then a religious upbringing that I had, feeling like, hey, I think I kind of won the birth lottery. There's probably a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I am who are never going to have a chance just based on the zip code that I was born in versus others. And so I thought I was going to become an international human rights attorney. I went over to Hungary and spent some time at George Soros' school there, which houses the Open Society Institute. And then randomly at a conference met now my business partner, who was a 30-year venture guy here in the Valley, who'd been investing into microfinance institutions ahead of the curve. And he said, I think we're going to invest in some other things. And so I'd made that shift in my mind that I wasn't going to be a human rights attorney when I went to business school. But then realizing I could kind of blend the two was the trigger for me to, I think, take a risk into something we call the impact investing space, which still is very nascent and very young, yet there's very strong opportunities for those investments.
I should have mentioned in your intro that you have a law degree and an MBA, and you have a psych background, so you've sort of covered a huge swath of the issues. We had a question right here.
Hi, Chris. I'm humbled, and it was a brilliant talk. What can I do to start making a difference and help empower my teams to do that?
What kind of work do you do?
I'm an industrial designer.
You're an industrial designer?
Yeah, I sort of do. I work in digital. I'm part of Global, but I'm very focused in digital, and you're often commercially driven rather than community driven. So it's but in our training we want to make the world a better place. Yeah. So what can we do? What can I do to reintroduce that, to do the two things together better?
Oh, we could go right down the rabbit hole. Nathan and I could.
I have an ID background too.
Do you know he's written a book on this subject?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read your book.
It's actually called Design is the Problem. He's written a book on the topic. There's a lot we could discuss. But I think a lot of the time it depends on if I think if you have clients, it really depends on the kind of client you've got and what they're looking for. And so I have seen both, industrial designers who are doing consulting who can take a very strong hand and actually are able to really, present some really interesting ideas. We're going to make this completely non-toxic, totally repairable, like a lot of very thoughtful things, and they get their clients on board. There's an interesting psychology on how to do that. But I've also, through the years, I've also known industrial designers who've just kind of done things relatively secretly, where somebody will be like, "Oh, we think we're going to get rid of PVC in our supply chain," and the designer's like, "Yeah, I phased that out 2 years ago." Just doing it because it's the right thing to do. They've done the research, they've figured it out, and they've swapped in different materials, they've designed things to be repairable, or they've thought about those kinds of considerations. And it depends a lot on the psychology of what you're doing and who you're working with.
Yeah, I would just add that for anyone that's in design here, or even in tech for that matter, there are things you can do at the product level for your clients or within your company, dematerialization strategies and material selection strategies. But I think the more important thing is not to be afraid to get involved with their business model, because there's probably something driving in the business model that's driving decisions that are going to aggravate the hell out of you because they're limiting what you can do in terms of sustainability. And it's not really an invitation, but you make it an invitation to go change their business, because you can show them ways of not just saving money on resources and production and manufacturing, but how to make things that you can charge more for, which increases their top line, but they may not be even thinking of those as. Unfortunately, there's, if you poll people in the world on how many people, when they're ready to buy something, would buy something because it saves the planet, there's not a lot of people that, in actual behavior do that. But as a designer, developer, technologist in products and services, we know that we can do exactly the same things that Dawn just outlined, but do it under the guise of, saving money, increasing health, risk mitigation, or connecting with people's values. And it's all sort of the same processes. So, great.
Yeah, I would say that it's more a comment than a question, but we're coming from, we're talking about digital, and we are spending countless of hours into building solutions and not being sensible with the amount of human work that is related to that. So I'm puzzled by the fact that many of our developers, for example, they develop code to work, to do something, but they are not realizing how much impact they could have created if they were able to get a friend, a coworker, to actually reuse that code and making it more sustainable. So rather than just thinking on sustainability from an environmental perspective, I believe that from a human perspective, we should be restoring the pride of, okay, I built this piece of code that is being used everywhere and it's making a huge impact. Because I believe that creating code is like having a child. Should be something that we are proud, that everyone is using. In that way, we could make our intangible creations also be sustainable. And as Dawn just said, we are in a hurry. We could be in a much better place if we could all make sense of this. So perhaps, particularly for Autodesk, and other companies who are building tools that give us productivity, would be great to see that we can create an economy where we measure the impact of our virtual creations. Yeah. Something that would always be reminding us of that impact.
I think it's really important to note that all these same issues of sustainability are part of, or can be part of, your strategy for employee engagement, partner engagement, not just customer engagement. So making people aware of these things, making them appreciative of each other, that's one of the reasons, that's one of the ways you keep employees.
And just for what it's worth, having your code be efficient is actually a really good way of saving electricity, and it has a really non-trivial effect on the amount of carbon we put in the atmosphere. So it is related.
Yeah, the code bloat right now on web pages it's just insane. Yeah. There were some other questions here.
Yeah, I have a question for the financial aspect. How do you balance between your obligation to the investors to maximize the return on investment and your moral obligation to help those who need it the most. Because usually, those who need it the most can the least afford it, and it becomes most challenging in terms of infrastructure, safety, security, and the ability to deploy any solution for those. So how do you balance between those two?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most common question that we always get in our work. First off, I think that there's a false dichotomy between saying that something can have strong financial returns and something can generate strong social impact. So if you were to look at, let's say, one of our companies that is providing the lowest cost source of financing and goods to low-income people because nobody's serving them, and you can actually build a great business model off it with strong margins, it's making the right decisions into the right models that can actually accomplish both, and that the social impact is baked into the DNA of the business. Now you get into very nuanced conversations around, okay, you've built out a model, and this would affect, I think, any company that's here in the Valley, is how much do we continue to charge for that once we already have returned, 10 times our money on, from an equity perspective, or what's the return on, our investments at the current time? You then have to get to a point, is somebody going to come and disrupt you because you continue to charge too much? And I think that we see this in certain sectors where, there's been a lot of arguments around microfinance in certain countries. And typically what ends up happening is the most responsible winners. So we made a decision with one of our microfinance banks that we would always continue to reduce the margin or the return on assets after we got to a stable business model, and we knew exactly how much it cost to do X, Y, and Z, and we weren't trying to develop more and more products. And then on those new products, we would, there's a lot of risk there, so we would end up charging more. But low-income folks really aren't looking for a handout. They're looking for a service and a product that fits their needs and is high quality. And you would be surprised sometimes to see that if you didn't charge something that was actually a pretty strong price, there's no trust there because they think this is just worth
cheap,
nothing. Because if I'm paying 60% interest on a loan, or I'm paying 5 times as much for some type of product, whether it's cooking oil or whether it's, we have a company that their biggest selling item is actually women's undergarments because nobody's serving low-income women's needs in rural areas. And if we didn't charge a certain price, they would think it was not a high quality, and it would be just as crappy as everything they've ever gotten in their lives. So it's a very nuanced question. I think that what we have to say is, if we're taking an equity risk as well, so the difference between being an equity fund and a debt fund also has its challenges and its opportunities. But you have to then align yourself with your investor base and say, is enough enough? But at the end of the day, I'm making an investment and I'm not controlling the company, and I have 14 other co-investors who maybe don't view things exactly the same way as me. So you can always be that voice to push towards, let's develop new products, let's lower the cost on this one and find a way of making it up in a different way because it could be a sales aid or a tool to building a bigger business.
One more question?
Yeah, here's a question from the field, and then we'll take one final question from the floor. Are self-driving cars sustainable? And what does that look like in terms of environment, economics, and social sustainability?
Jury's out.
Probably yes. That's my answer. Depends on how they're implemented. At the very least, you can imagine, just calculate really quickly how often the car that you own, if you own a car, is in motion. It's probably a couple hours a day. So a self-driving car, or especially if it's an automated service like Uber or something doing it, those cars get used a lot more. A lot goes into making a car. It's a big energy sink. So just on that level, it's definitely a possibility that this will be a big boon for sustainability. But the cultural and the social impacts, man, the jury's really out for that.
Yeah, I was talking with the chief economist at the IFC, and he actually made a very strong argument for self-driving cars and how it's actually creating a new future and new system. And I actually didn't think that he would be the one who said that. So he had a very nuanced argument. And then if you spend a lot of time listening to what people are talking about in the World Economic Forum with the fourth industrial revolution, it's been coined as, maybe.
But there's a lot of truckers' jobs and taxi drivers' jobs.
Yeah, I mean,
that,
I think there's so many that you could argue so deeply on both sides of the coin there. I mean, I think the thing on the social side that maybe I'll hand it to you. I think the thing that concerns me is like, I have a 3-year-old, and if I want to get an Uber, let's say Uber or Lyft takes over, or some kind of car sharing service takes over, and they're all self-driving. By the way, I cannot put my child in any of those cars.
Yeah.
Any of them. Because because none of them have car seats. And so legally, I cannot put my child in those cars. They are private businesses. They can choose to serve me or not, right? Just like anyone. And so if those kinds of companies take over the market, if that's the direction that we're going, how are we creating mobility for everyone, or how are we creating mobility for a more stratified version of society? You could talk about how to tweak the business models in all different directions here. I would hope that the future of self-driving cars is that they're electric, they're solar, and that we've figured out a way for them to be accessible to the widest possible range of society.
Yeah, and I'm originally from Ohio, paper mill and steel mill town originally, and a lot of friends of the family were truck drivers, and they never went to college, but they were making such good money year after year doing this job that they actually could buy a house, they could take their kids through college, the first generation going to college, and that's going to all be gone. And so when you're talking about the middle of the country in the United States, and those jobs are, once they're lost, you're not going to train those people to make that $100,000 or more a year. You're just not. So that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, it's all going to be plumbing and electricity, or electricians. That's where all the jobs are going to end up being, I think, for lower end skills, et cetera. We don't really have time for one last question. I want to ask one last question of the three of you, though. What are quickly some tools that people can consult, use, et cetera, to start engaging with sustainability now? You had mentioned, Eve, B Corps, which is a great local organization it's global, but it actually happens to be headquartered here in San Francisco. That's a great way to learn about how you can bake sustainability into your business. Eve's book, Material Change, is a whole story of what she went through and how her learning about how to tweak business models to create social and cultural change. I would recommend that book. What else would you recommend for people here?
I mean, you can look at some different studies and things where people are baking in externalities into their investment decisions. So HSBC has put together some papers. There's also a growing body of data and studies on people who are actually investing alongside their values on a sustainable world, and they're actually showing, now these numbers aren't as large as the other data sets that the way that capital is being traditionally allocated, but you're seeing outperformance amongst folks who are investing with sustainability as a core towards, how they want to build their own wealth for the future. So lots and lots of studies and data. The jury is still out a little bit, but you are seeing those trends.
I started my first company 20 years ago, and there was not many resources at the time. But there are thousands of people like us in your neighborhood, in your communities. It really is. It's growing, whether it's investment or it's in corporate companies who have a division that's got this expertise, or people in small companies. And there are people out there that for consulting or for helping you, and there's all these organizations. We're in the thousands. We're in the tens of thousands. Are we in the 100,000s yet?
I don't know.
But we're definitely in the tens of thousands. So, you can either search some of us out, and we can give you other ideas, or we can, go Google and figure out some of these organizations.
My one really specific reference is that I did work for a number of years to build out a whole set of tools and like educational training for how to do sustainable design, architecture, and engineering. It's probably the most comprehensive set of free content on those topics for practitioners out there, at least in English. I don't know of others. Anyway, so that's called the Autodesk Sustainability Workshop, and it's constantly evolving.
It's all online.
Pardon me?
It's all online.
It's all online, it's all free, it's all Creative Commons. Share and enjoy.
Great, okay. So thank you very much.
Yes.
And I guess it's break time.